Hello everyone and welcome to another Endgame episode with Coach B and MasterChess.com. In this video, we're going to take a look at the positions that involve a king, a rook, and a pawn versus a king and a bishop. Since the bishop can draw alone against the rook, we're not going to take a look at positions where the bishop has a pawn, since the bishop doesn't need a pawn to get a draw. So we're only going to look at the positions where the rook has a pawn. And before I get started, I do want to mention that if you haven't watched the first video, the king and bishop versus king and rook, I encourage you to watch that video first so you can fully comprehend this lesson. In these type of positions, a rook and a pawn usually win against the bishop with correct play. But there are positions where the king and bishop are able to achieve a draw, and we're going to take a look at those positions in this video. So in this first position, it's white to move, and here, white should be able to win this game with correct play. In order to win the game here, white needs to move the king to f6, threatening checkmate on b8, from which black can respond with king to g8. After king to e7, black is pretty much lost. What white is trying to do is simply push the pawn forward to try to exchange the pawn for the bishop and then winning the game with the rook. Coming with the king to g7, the same play will be played. Here, white is simply going to march the pawn to f6 with check. After something like king to g6, now white cannot push the pawn right away as the bishop can take since the path of the rook is blocked by the white king. So here all white needs to do is move the rook to b1 and going to chase away the black king so that he can push the pawn. After bishop to d5, the rook could come to g1, attacking the black king, and now the black king has to let the pawn go. Going to the h-file doesn't really help, as the pawn will simply march forward. Coming with the king to f5, the same play will happen. White will start pushing the pawn, and now the bishop will have to sacrifice for the pawn. After white wins the bishop, then he's going to be able to win the game with the rook. Coming back from the beginning, I do want to mention that if here white pushes the pawn to f6, black can now draw this game. All he has to do is keep the bishop on the a2 to g8 diagonal, but he wants to make sure that he avoids the squares g8 and f7. The reason for that, if black does step with the bishop to g8, white can win again with move f7. And now, after the bishop takes on f7, the king will come to f6, and checkmate is threatened on b8. So after bishop to e8, the rook will still go to b8 as the bishop is pinned, and the only move that black has now is king to g8, from which white will simply capture the bishop with the rook and be able to win the game from here. But coming back after f6, if black stays on the a2 to g8 diagonal without stepping on f7 or g8, he's going to be able to draw this game. So after something like bishop to a2, there's not much that white can do. The only tries that he has is moving the pawn to f7 or moving the king to f4, trying to get the king to g6 and checkmate on b8. However, none of those tries will work. If he moves the pawn to f7 here, well, here black can respond with king to g7. If white tries to promote the pawn, then the black king will simply take it. And after the king moves, let's say king to f5, the bishop will simply capture the pawn and a draw has been achieved. There's nothing that white can do here to push for a win. The black king will simply march towards the correct corner, and then keeping the bishop on the a2 to g8 diagonal will be able to achieve a draw, as we've seen in the previous video where we looked at the king and rook versus king and bishop. And coming back after bishop to a2, we looked at the pawn moving to f7. Another try that white has is getting the king to g6 and then try to checkmate on b8. However, this is not going to work if the bishop is going to be able to attack the king when he steps on g6. So black needs to make sure that the bishop is able to check the king when he reaches f6. So let's go over this try. After king to f4, the bishop will move to c4. After king to g5, here black needs to be very careful. The correct move here will be bishop to d5. This is the only move that will allow black to check the white king when he reaches g6. Coming back, we can see that the square b3 is covered by the rook, and if the bishop goes to a2, he's not going to be able to deliver a check on b1 as the rook can capture it. So again, bishop to d5 is the only move. After this, the rook can move to c7. And now the bishop can go on a2 since he is going to be able to go to b1 to deliver check since the rook is not on the b file anymore. After king to g6, then bishop to b1 check. King to h6, bishop to a2. Rook to a7, well, bishop to c4. And white cannot make any progress and black is able to achieve a draw. Coming back after the check on b1 and king to h6 and bishop to a2, we looked at rook to a7. I do want to mention that white cannot push the pawn here to f7, as the bishop can simply take that pawn and a draw is still achieved. After something like king to g5, the king could go to g8, rook to a7, bishop to c4, and again we've seen this position in the previous video. This is a drawn position as the black king is near the correct corner. Next, we're going to take a look at the other positions where the king and bishop can draw. And those involve a king and rook with the pawn on the rook's file and the defending king in the right's bishop corner, which is the opposite color of his bishop. First, we're going to take a look at the positions where the pawn is on the 6th rank. In this case, black is always able to draw, and the draw is actually quite easy. All the black has to do is keep the bishop on the b1 to h7 diagonal, and then when the bishop reaches the 7th rank, the bishop simply needs to take that pawn and a draw is achieved. So after something like rook to c7, bishop to d3. After king to f6, bishop to e4. Again, the bishop just needs to stay on that diagonal. And if he pushes the pawn to h7, then the bishop simply needs to take that pawn and then a draw has been achieved. A check on c8 will simply be met with bishop to g8, and there's nothing that white can do here to win the game. This next position is very similar to the previous position. The only difference is that the pawn is not on the 6th rank, but it's on the 5th rank. Here, black is still able to achieve a draw with correct play. All he has to do again, he just needs to make sure that he stays with the bishop on the b1 to h7 diagonal to be able to take the pawn when he reaches h7. So from here, there's only two plays that white can try here, either checking the king on a8 or moving the king to h6. If white tries rook to a8 check, well here black is simply going to get out of the corner with king to g7. The white king cannot make any progress. A check back on a7 is simply going to repeat the position where black is simply going to go back in the corner. So if he tries h6 check, well after king to h7, again there's nothing that white can do. Rook check on a7, the black king will simply go back, and we've just seen this position where the bishop just needs to stay on the b1 to h7 diagonal and sacrifice the bishop for the pawn when he reaches h7. So coming back, the other try is king to h6. From here, again, the bishop cannot leave the b1 to h7 diagonal, so the correct play here is king to g8. After this, white will respond with rook to g7 check. And now, another very important move, king to f8. If black makes the mistake here to go in the corner with king to h8, well now, white can win this game because he's going to move the rook to d7, attacking the bishop, and at the same time threatening checkmate on d8. If the bishop goes to h7 to block checkmate on g8, well here, white can simply take the bishop with check and then win the game from there. And coming back, the only other try that black has is moving the bishop to c4 to prevent checkmate by moving to g8 from the a2 to g8 diagonal. Well now, the rook will simply go to d8 check, the bishop will have to move in front, king to g5, preventing stalemate from happening, letting the black king loose. After king to h7, rook to d7 check, king to h8, pawn to h6, bishop to b3, the pawn will march to h7, and now black doesn't have any good moves. Just moving the bishop on the diagonal, let's say bishop to c4, the king will march to h6, and now black is lost. After something like bishop to d3, white will check the king on d8, the bishop will have to block, but then the rook can take the bishop and checkmate is achieved. But coming back, the correct play is king to f8, and after this, let's say white responds with rook to g3 attacking the bishop. Well now, bishop to c2. Again, we want to stay on that diagonal. And now the best try that white has is rook to g6. If black makes the mistake of taking the rook here, well now he's going to be able to win this game because he's simply going to take on g6. After king to g8, pushing the pawn to g7, the black king is forced out, and now the white king is going to be able to move in and he's going to be able to promote the pawn. However, coming back after rook to g6, black just needs to stay on that diagonal, bishop to d3. And now the white king will go to h7, threatening to move to h8 and winning the game. However, an excellent move by black here is king to h7, the only move that saves the game. After this, there's not much that white can do. After king to h6, king to f8. And now the only two tries that white has is moving the rook back or king to g5. Let's take a look at both of those options. If king to g5, then the bishop now can take on h6. After the pawn takes king to g7 is a draw. And coming back, if the rook retreats to g1, bishop to c2, king to g5, king to g8, and we've reached the same position, and this is how black is going to be able to achieve a draw. And in this last position we're going to go over, the only difference we have is that the pawn is on the 4th rank. So when the pawn is on the 4th rank or less advanced, the ending is 1. The winning sequence, however, is too long to learn by heart, but if you've carefully studied the previous two endings, you will be able to find it over the board. So I'm going to present here the main lines without any comments. And the best way to learn this position is to watch it a couple of times and then try to play it against the computer. The winning sequence starts with king to h6, threatening checkmate on a8. So after this, black needs to respond with king to g8. And now, after this, white will respond with rook to g7 check. And then there's only two tries that black has, moving the king to f8 or moving the king to h8. But both of those are losing. And I'm just going to fast forward through the response so you could see how white can win this game. We're going to first go over king to h8. And white checkmated the black king. And coming back after rook to g7, a better try will be king to f8. But even here, white can win this game. After rook to g3, king to f7, king to h5, up to b1, the rook to g5, bishop to c2, king to g4, bishop to b1, h5, bishop to d3, h6, bishop to c2, rook to g7 check, king to f8, king to g5, bishop to d3, king to f6, bishop to c2, h7, and after bishop takes on h7, the rook will win the bishop and also win the game. Alright everyone, and that concludes the lesson for today. Thank you for watching this video, and again I encourage you to visit my website masterchess.com, where you can practice these positions against the computer. Also check out my beginner to master chess course that I started online. If you liked my video, please subscribe and don't forget to check out my new website masteryourchess.com, where you can learn, practice, test, and master your chess knowledge.